Far from the noise of modern cities, far from roads, lights, and machines, there are places on Earth that still make people stop and stare in silence. These are not normal ruins. These are ancient structures that seem far ahead of their time. Some stand in empty deserts. Some hide deep in mountains. Some sleep under forests, rock, and sand. For many years, they have asked the same question again and again. Who built them, and how? He had spent years reading about lost cities, broken temples, giant stones, and ancient sites that did not make sense. At first, he thought most of the stories were just legends. He believed there was always a simple answer. Maybe people in the past were stronger than modern people thought. Maybe they had more time, more workers, and better planning. But the deeper he looked, the stranger it became. Some ancient structures were built with stones so large that even modern cranes would struggle to lift them. Some were cut with such clean lines that they looked like machine work. Some were placed with perfect balance and accuracy, as if the builders had tools far better than simple hammers and ropes. And some were made in places where building anything at all should have been nearly impossible. That was when he began to feel that SCI-FI was hiding something, not a small thing, something big, something old, something powerful. He stood in front of one ancient site in silence, his eyes moving across the stone surface. The blocks were huge, cold, heavy, perfectly joined. There were no wide gaps, no weak design, no clear mistakes. It looked too exact, too advanced, too smart. He tried to imagine ancient workers shaping these stones by hand. He tried to picture them moving each piece across rough land without engines, steel machines, or modern roads. It did not feel impossible. It felt wrong, and that feeling stayed with him. The old world, according to history books, was simple. Ancient people had basic tools. They lived hard lives. They fought, farmed, prayed, and built what they could with what they had. That is the story most people know. But these structures did not match that story. They looked like signs of lost knowledge. Some of them were aligned with stars. Some were built with deep understanding of math and geometry. Some were designed to survive earthquakes, time, storms, and war. Others had hidden tunnels, strange chambers, and features that experts still could not fully explain. The more he learned, the more one idea returned to his mind. What if ancient people knew far more than modern people were willing to accept? That question changed everything, because if even one of these structures was truly far ahead of its time, then human history was not as simple as people had been told. And if there were many such places spread across the world, then maybe this was not luck. Maybe it was not mystery alone. Maybe it was proof that ancient humanity was capable of things the modern world had forgotten. He had heard all the common answers. Some said it was just human effort. Enough workers, enough years, enough planning. Others said people today underestimated the intelligence of ancient builders, and that was possible. In fact, he wanted to believe that. He wanted the answer to be human skill, human patience, and human will. But then came the details that refused to stay quiet. Why were some stones cut so precisely? Why were some structures placed in perfect line with the sun, the moon, or certain stars? Why were massive blocks moved across impossible distances? Why did some places show signs of planning that looked almost modern? And perhaps the biggest question of all, why do experts still argue about how these places were built? If the answers were easy, the debate would be over, but it was not over, not even close. That was why these ancient structures still pulled people toward them. Not just tourists, not just historians, but dreamers, researchers, explorers, and anyone who had ever looked at the past and felt that something was missing. Something had been lost. He could feel it now more than ever. Each site told the same strange story in a different way. A story of builders with vision far beyond their age. A story of knowledge that should not have existed. A story written not on paper, but in stone. And stone does not lie easily in this journey. He would explore 7 ancient structures that seem far ahead of their time. Each one was real. Each one was famous for a reason. And each one carried a mystery that still had no clear answer. Some would challenge science, some would challenge history, and some would challenge the idea of what ancient humans were truly able to do. But this was only the beginning, because the first structure he would examine was not just famous, it was one of the greatest mysteries ever built by human hands. A giant shape rising from the desert, ancient, silent, almost perfect. A structure so advanced that even now, after thousands of years, the world still could not fully explain it. And as he moved closer to that first impossible wonder, one thought grew stronger in his mind. Maybe the ancient world was never primitive. Maybe it was powerful in ways the modern world no longer understands. For thousands of years, it had stood in silence, rising from the hot sands of Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza looked less like a tomb and more like a message left behind for the future. It was old beyond memory, older than kingdoms, older than empires, older than almost every building still standing on Earth. Time had touched it, storms had worn it. And yet it remained. That alone was impressive. But what truly troubled him was not its age, it was its precision. When he first began to study the Great Pyramid, he expected to find a large but simple ancient structure. He thought it would be a massive grave, built by many workers over many years. That was the common story. And for a long time, he accepted it. Then he looked deeper. The pyramid was built with incredible accuracy. Its base was almost perfectly level. Its sides were aligned with true north, with shocking precision. Even today, with advanced tools, that kind of exact alignment would require careful planning and skill. But this structure was built more than 4,500 years ago. How? That question followed him everywhere. The more facts he found, the stranger the pyramid became. It was made from millions of stone blocks. Some were heavy limestone, while others were giant granite stones brought from far away. Many of these blocks weighed several tons. Some inside the structure weighed much more. Moving one such stone would be hard. Moving thousands of them felt almost impossible. He tried to imagine the builders. Men pulling giant blocks under the burning sun. Workers shaping stone with basic tools. Engineers planning every angle without modern machines, lasers, or computers. It was not impossible to picture, but it was hard to believe they achieved such perfection. The inside of the pyramid made the mystery even deeper. Narrow passages, hidden chambers, and the famous king's chamber suggested a design far more complex than a simple pile of stone. Everything seemed planned with purpose. The spaces were not random. The measurements were not careless. There was a feeling of order inside the pyramid, as if every tunnel and chamber had been placed for a reason, and that reason was still unclear. Many believed it was built as a royal tomb for Pharaoh Khufu. That might be true. But to him, the pyramid felt too advanced, too exact, too carefully designed to be only a tomb. It had the shape of a monument, but the mind of a machine. Even the materials raised questions. The granite used in some chambers was cut and shaped with amazing precision. Some joints were so tight that it was hard to place even a thin blade between the stones. For an ancient structure, that level of skill was hard to explain. Then came the numbers. The Great Pyramid seemed to hide mathematical patterns in its design. Researchers had long noticed strange links between its shape and important values in geometry. Some said these patterns were only coincidence. Others believed the builders had deep knowledge of math and earth measurements. He did not know which answer was right, but he knew one thing. This was no crude ancient building. This was a structure built by people who understood planning, balance, weight, direction, and form at an extremely high level, and that changed everything. Because if ancient builders could create something like this, and history had to give them far more credit than it usually did. The Great Pyramid was not only big, it was intelligent. Its design showed skill beyond what many expected from the ancient world. Still, some questions refused to disappear. How did they lift the stones so high? How did they transport giant blocks across long distances? How did they align the pyramid so perfectly with the earth? And why does the structure still feel so mysterious, even after centuries of study? The deeper he went, the more he felt that the pyramid was hiding something. Not treasure, not secret gold. Something greater than that knowledge. Lost knowledge. Perhaps. Not magical knowledge, and not something beyond human ability. But maybe a kind of understanding that had once existed and was later forgotten. A way of building, measuring, and thinking that belonged to the ancient world, yet somehow seemed more advanced than expected. Standing before the Great Pyramid, he did not see only stone. He saw human ambition at its highest level. He saw proof that ancient people may have known far more than modern people assumed. And he saw a message from the past, still standing under the Egyptian sky. A message that said history was not complete. The Great Pyramid did not simply survive time. It challenged time. It forced every visitor, every researcher, and every skeptic to ask the same uncomfortable question. What if the high in the mountains of Bolivia, where the air felt thin and the land looked harsh and ancient, there stood the broken remains of a place that did not seem to belong to the past. Its name was Puma, P-U-N-K-U. At first glance, it looked like ruins. Large red sandstone blocks and gray stone pieces lay scattered across the ground, broken and displaced by time. To many visitors, it looked like the remains of a destroyed temple or an old ceremonial site. But when he looked closer, the mystery became impossible to ignore. These were not ordinary stones. Some of the blocks had edges, so straight and surfaces so smooth that they looked machine-made. Others had perfect cuts, sharp inner corners, and carved lines that seemed to exact for ancient hand tools. A few even had strange shapes that looked almost industrial, as if they were parts of a giant stone system built to connect together. The more he studied Puma Punku, the less it looked like a normal ancient site. It looked precise, too. Precise. He knelt near one of the famous stone blocks and ran his eyes along its edge. The angle was clean. The line was sharp. The cut looked controlled, not rough. This was not random stone breaking. This was careful shaping, skilled shaping. And the question returned again. How had ancient people done this? Puma Punku was believed to be part of a larger ancient site near Tiwanaku, a place linked to a powerful pre-Columbian civilization. Historians believed the builders used stone tools, patience, and human labor. That was the accepted explanation. But for him, that answer did not feel complete. Because the stones at Puma Punku did not just show effort. They showed a level of precision that felt strangely modern. Some of the blocks were carved into forms that people often described as H-shaped. These stone pieces looked as if they had been designed to fit together in a repeating pattern, almost like building units. Their measurements seemed controlled. Their shapes seemed planned. Their cuts seemed repeated with unusual accuracy. He had seen many ancient ruins before. Most were rough in some way. Impressive, yes. Powerful, yes. But still clearly ancient. Puma Punku felt different. It felt like someone had used a method that history no longer understood. Another mystery was the stone itself. Some of the blocks were massive, weighing many tons, yet they had been moved to a high-altitude location where transport would have been extremely difficult. Even today, moving such heavy stone pieces through that landscape would require machines, roads, and planning. So how had ancient builders done it? No one had a simple answer. Some researchers said ramps, ropes, and human force were enough. Others believed ancient people had developed techniques that had been lost over time. He wanted to believe that too. He wanted the truth to remain human. But the site kept raising doubts. The cuts were too exact. The shapes were too complex. The design was too advanced. And there was something else that made Puma Punku even more mysterious. It was broken. Whatever this place had once been, it was no longer whole. The stones were scattered, damaged, and out of place. It was as if something powerful had torn the structure apart long ago. Earthquakes may have played a role. Time may have done some of the damage. But the result added to the mystery. It was hard to understand the full purpose of the site because so much of it had been lost. That only made it more haunting. He imagined what Puma Punku might have looked like in its full form. A complete stone complex. Huge fitted blocks. Perfectly shaped joints. A place of ceremony, power, or knowledge. Perhaps a center of a culture, more skilled than anyone had expected. Or perhaps something even stranger. Some people had made wild claims about Puma Punku. They said it was too advanced for Miskinator. I was too advanced for Miskinator, my lies claimed love. And leaves a rich, long-lasting color. More skilled than any we is so long-still than anyone had expect. Or so, my lies hate. My might slas, my slikes lies. My slab. We skill conveyed says, but my convey /sis at sea lates by sabet, wf, like bowel lides loud, by mind, kiet by wisa per usake stability to siker to say we leps, but to key to put it I to sit it to guy, it sit it I to the ancient humans. They called it impossible. They built stories around lost civilizations and forgotten technologies. He was careful with such ideas. He did not want fantasy. He wanted truth. But the truth was this: Puma Punku was real. Its precision was real. Its mystery was real. And its existence forced people to question what ancient builders were truly capable of. That was enough. He did not need aliens or myths to feel wonder. Human mystery was powerful enough. The idea that ancient people may have held skills, methods, or knowledge now lost to time was already incredible. Puma Punku did not need an easy answer. Its power came from the fact that no answer felt complete. Standing among the broken stones, he felt something he had felt before at other ancient sites, not fear. Not confusion. Respect for unknown builders who had shaped stone with a confidence that still challenged the modern world. Respect for a past that was clearly more complex than simple history lessons allowed. Respect for the idea that human civilization may have climbed high before, only to lose pieces of itself in the long silence of time. Puma Punku was not just a ruin, it was a warning. A reminder that history can break apart just like stone. That knowledge can vanish. That greatness can fall and leave behind only questions. And as he walked away from the site, one thought remained in his mind. If this broken place could still confuse experts after all these years, then what else had? The ancient world built that modern people still did not understand. The answer waited underground, hidden beneath the land in Turkey. There was a place even stranger than carved stone. Not a temple, not a monument, but a city. A city built in darkness. A city made for survival, and whatever had forced people to build. It below the earth was a mystery all its own, beneath the dry land of central Turkey, hidden under quiet streets and ordinary homes. There was a world that should not have existed. It was not a cave, it was not a tunnel, it was a city. A city built deep underground. Its name was Darren Q, and the first time he learned about it, the idea almost sounded unreal. Ancient people had carved a massive underground settlement into soft volcanic rock. Level after level went down into the earth. Rooms opened into tunnels. Narrow paths led to storage areas, living spaces, wells, air shafts, and hidden chambers. It was not a simple shelter for a few people. It was a carefully planned underground world. That was what made it so disturbing. He had seen great ancient structures before. Pyramids, temples, giant stones, ruined walls. Those were built to be seen. They rose into the sky. They showed power. Darinkyu did the opposite. It disappeared, and that raised a different question. What kind of fear makes people build a city under the ground? The deeper he studied Darinkyu, the more impossible it seemed. This was not a small emergency hiding place. It was large enough to protect thousands of people. Entire families could live there. Animals could be kept there. Food could be stored there. Water could be reached there. Air could move through long vertical shafts that connected the deep levels to the surface above. Someone had planned all of this. Someone had thought about survival in detail. That was the part that stayed with him. Ancient builders did not just dig random holes into rock. They designed a system. They understood airflow, movement, defense, and hidden living. They made sure people could breathe, eat, drink, hide, and seal themselves inside if danger came. One of the most impressive features was the huge stone doors. These heavy round stones could roll into place and block passages. From the inside, they gave protection. From the outside, they made the tunnels extremely hard to enter. The city was not only hidden, it was built to resist attack. That meant one thing was certain. The builders expected danger. But from whom? That question haunted every part of Darinkyu. Some believe the underground city was used during times of war or invasion. Others believed people hid there to escape raids, persecution, or disaster. These ideas made sense. Human history was full of violence, fear, and survival. But still, Q felt larger and more advanced than a short-term shelter. It felt prepared for something serious, something lasting. He imagined ancient families moving through the tunnels by torchlight. The sound of footsteps echoing through stone. Children kept quiet. Food carefully stored. Doors sealed. No sunlight. No open sky. Only darkness, waiting. And the hope that whatever was above would pass. It was not hard to imagine the fear, and yet there was also intelligence in every part of the design. Ventilation shafts carried fresh air down through the levels. Wells gave access to water. Rooms were placed with clear purpose. Some spaces were used for storage. Some may have been used for worship, work, or meeting. The city was not chaotic. It was organized. For an ancient underground structure, that level of planning was extraordinary. The more he thought about it, the more Darinkyu challenged the old image of primitive, ancient life. These people were not acting without thought. They were engineers of survival. They understood how to create a hidden system beneath the earth and make it work for large numbers of people. That required vision. It required skill. It required knowledge. And, perhaps most of all, it required urgency, because no one builds a place like Darinkyu without a reason. The city reached deep into the ground. And even today, not every part has been fully explored. That fact alone added to its mystery. How much more remained hidden? Were there sealed tunnels no one had entered in centuries? Were there chambers whose purpose had been forgotten? How many stories of fear and endurance had been buried in that? Underground silence. The stone walls did not speak, but they left clues. They told him that ancient people could think far ahead. They told him that survival could drive humans to create wonders in the dark. And they told him on a flat open plain in England, under a gray sky and cold wind, a circle of giant stones stood silent against the time. This was Stonehenge. To many people, it looked like a simple ring of rocks. Tourists came, took pictures, and left. But when he stood there, he did not see simple rocks. He saw a puzzle that refused to be solved. The stones were massive. Some stood upright. Some lay broken on the grass. Others rested on top, forming arches that had survived for thousands of years. The wind moved around them, but the stones did not move. They had been there longer than most languages, longer than most nations, longer than most memories, but the size was not the only mystery. The real question was distance. Geologists had studied the stones closely. They found that some of them did not belong to this land. They had come from far away. Some were brought from hills nearly 200 miles distant. That was a long journey. Today, moving a heavy stone that far would require trucks, roads, and engines. But this was built thousands of years ago. There were no engines. There were no wheels. There were no heavy machines. So how did they do it? He walked around the circle, touching the cold surface of one giant stone. It was rough but solid. He tried to imagine ancient people moving it. Did they roll it on logs? Did they pull it with ropes? Did they slide it on ice? Many experts had offered answers. Some said it was human strength and patience. Some said it was simple engineering. But when he looked at the weight of the stones, those answers felt thin. Moving one stone was hard. Moving many stones was a mission. And there was another layer to the mystery. Stonehenge was not just a random circle, it was planned. The stones were placed in specific positions. They lined up with the sun. During the summer solstice, the sun rose over a specific stone in a perfect line. During the winter, it set in another specific direction. This meant the builders understood the sky. They understood the seasons. They understood time. In an age when many people believed ancient humans were only focused on survival, this structure showed something else. It showed knowledge. It showed that someone had looked up at the stars and the sun and tracked their movement with care. Why? That was the question that stayed with him. Was it a calendar for farming? Was it a place for worship? Was it a site for healing? Or was it something else entirely? Some believed it was a place of power. Others believed it was a burial ground. Some even thought it was a message left for the future. He did not know the true answer, but he knew this was not a casual project. People did not spend generations building something like this without a strong reason. They did not move heavy stones across hundreds of miles without a clear goal. This place mattered to them. It was important enough to spend lives on. That kind of dedication was rare. Standing in the center of the circle, he felt a strange silence. It was not empty silence. It was heavy silence, as if the stones were holding a secret they refused to share. The wind blew, but the stones stood still. They had watched empires rise and fall. They had watched languages change and disappear. They had watched the world turn modern, and yet they remained. Stonehenge was proof that ancient people could plan big things. They could work together. They could understand the world around them. But it was also proof that some knowledge had been lost. We know they built it. We do not know exactly why, and that gap in knowledge was where the mystery lived. He looked up at the top of one standing stone. It was high above him, smooth by time, but still strong. Who were the hands that placed it there? What did they see when they looked at the sun? What did they hope would happen here? The answers were gone. Only the stones remained. But as powerful as Stonehenge was, it was built from separate pieces. Stones were moved and placed together. That was impressive engineering yet. The next structure he would explore was different. It was not built by moving stones. It was not built by stacking blocks. It was created by removing stone. All of it from a single massive rock in India. There was a temple that was not built up. It was carved down, and the scale of what was removed was almost impossible to believe. In the heart of India, hidden among rocky hills, there was a temple that defied all logic of construction. It was called the Kailasa Temple. When he first saw pictures of it, he thought it was a normal building. He thought workers had built it by stacking stones, brick by brick, layer by layer. That was how temples were made. That was how cities were built. You start from the ground, and you go up. But when he arrived at the site in Ellora, he realized his mistake. This temple was not built up. It was carved down. The entire structure was made from a single massive rock. It was not assembled. It was revealed. Ancient builders had started at the top of a mountain and cut downward, removing stone until the temple emerged from the living rock. He stood before it in silence. The scale was hard to understand. The temple was huge. It had tall pillars, wide halls, inner chambers, and giant statues of elephants and gods. Every detail was carved from the same stone. There were no joints, no seams, no separate blocks. It was one piece. To create this, workers had to remove nearly 200,000 tons of rock. They had to dig deep into the earth around the temple to free it from the mountain. Imagine digging a hole around a building without touching the building itself. That was what they had done. He tried to picture the process in his mind. It seemed impossible. When people build normally, they can fix mistakes. If a brick is wrong, they remove it. If a wall is crooked, they adjust it. But here, there was no room for error. Once the stone was cut, it could not be put back. If the workers made a wrong strike with their chisel, if they miscalculated a measurement, or if they carved too deep, the entire structure could be ruined. There was no way to repair a mistake in a single solid rock. Yet there were no major mistakes. The design was perfect. The proportions were balanced. The art was beautiful. How did they plan this? He walked around the base of the temple. The walls were covered in carvings. Scenes from ancient stories were etched into the stone with incredible skill. Pillars stood tall and straight. Roofs were carved to look like wood, even though they were solid rock. It was not just a temple. It was a masterpiece of engineering. Experts believed it was built over 1,000 years ago. Some said it took decades. Others said it took centuries. Thousands of workers would have been needed. They would have worked under the hot sun, day after day, year after year. But even with many workers, the planning required was beyond normal. Someone had to visualize the entire temple inside the rock before the first cut was made. They had to know exactly how deep to dig. They had to know where every pillar and every wall would be. They had to hold the entire design in their minds while removing tons of stone around it. There were no blueprints found. There were no written plans, only the result remained. He touched the cold stone surface. It felt smooth despite its age. Time had worn it, but it still stood strong. Earthquakes had shaken the land, but the temple held firm because it was part of the mountain itself. This was not just construction. This was subtraction on a massive scale. It challenged the idea that ancient people needed complex machines to build big things. They did not have cranes. They did not have explosives. They had hammers, chisels, and patience. But was patience enough? He looked up at the top of the temple. How did they start? Did they build scaffolding to reach the top? Or did they stand on the rock itself and cut away the ground beneath their feet? Every answer led to more questions. The Kailasa Temple was proof that ancient humans had a level of focus and skill that was hard to match today. Modern machines could do this faster, yes. But the vision required to do this by hand was extraordinary. It showed that ancient people were not afraid of big challenges. They did not shy away from impossible tasks. They looked at a mountain and saw a temple waiting inside, and they had the courage to bring it out. Standing there, he felt a deep sense of respect. This was human power, not magic, not aliens. Just human will, human art, and human knowledge pushed to the limit. But as amazing as the Kailasa Temple was, it was not the end of the journey. There were still more structures that waited. Places where the stones were even heavier. Places where the location was even more impossible, in Lebanon. There was a platform built with blocks so large that modern engineers still argued about how they were moved, and in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there was a city built on water, using stone logs that should have sunk. The mystery was not limited to one land or one culture. It was everywhere, and as he prepared to look at the final structures, one thing became clear. The ancient world was full of wonders that modern science still struggled to explain. The journey was almost over, but the final stops were the heaviest of all. He traveled next to Lebanon, to a place called Baalbek. Here, the ruins of an ancient Roman temple stood on a platform made of stones that defied logic. These were not normal blocks. They were giants. One stone, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighed nearly 1,000 tons. Another, found later, weighed even more. To put that in perspective, the largest stones in the Great Pyramid weighed about 80 tons. These were 10 times heavier. Even today, with modern trucks, heavy cranes, and powerful engines, moving a stone like that would be a massive operation. It would require careful planning and heavy machinery, but these stones were moved and placed thousands of years ago. He stood near the site, looking up at the massive platform. The wind blew across the valley, but the stones did not move. They had not moved in millennia. How did ancient builders lift them? How did they transport them? Some said they used rollers and ramps, but the ground was uneven. The weight was almost too much for the earth itself to hold. There were no clear answers. Only the stones remained, silent and heavy, watching the world change around them. Baalbek was a testament to power, but the next site was a testament to something else entirely. He left the land behind and traveled to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Here, surrounded by water and reefs, lay the ruins of Nanma. It was often called the Venice of the Pacific. But instead of canals and boats, it was built from huge stone logs. The city was made of artificial islands created by stacking massive basalt columns. These columns were heavy, they were long, and they were placed in the middle of the ocean. He looked at the water around the ruins. It was deep, it was rough. Building here should have been impossible. There was no local source for the stone. The columns had to be brought from other parts of the island across the sea. How did ancient people transport heavy stone logs over water without modern ships? How did they stack them so precisely in the tide and waves? Some legends said magic was used. Some said giant birds carried the stones. He did not believe in magic. He believed in human skill. But even human skill had limits. Non-metal pushed those limits to the edge. It showed that ancient people were not afraid of the ocean. They did not see the sea as a barrier. They saw it as a place to build. Standing on the edge of one broken wall, with salt water crashing below, he felt the full weight of the journey. He had seen 7 structures. He had seen the pyramid in Egypt, the cuts of Pumapunku in Bolivia, The underground city of Turkey, the stars of Stonehenge, the carved mountain of India, the heavy stones of Lebanon, and the ocean city of the Pacific. They were in different lands. They were built by different cultures. They were separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. But they shared one thing. They were all ahead of their time. They all suggested that ancient humans were not primitive. They were not struggling blindly in the dark. They were engineers. They were astronomers. They were planners. They were builders of wonders. He realized that history books often told a simple story. They said humans started simple and slowly got smarter. But these structures suggested something else. They suggested that humans had reached high points before. They had gained knowledge. They had built great things. And then, for some reason, some of that knowledge was lost. Maybe due to war. Maybe due to disaster. Maybe due to time itself. The evidence was here, in the stone. The mystery was not about aliens or magic. The mystery was about humanity. What else had we forgotten? What other skills did our ancestors have that we no longer possess? The wind blew across the ocean ruins. The sun set over the ancient stones of Baalbek. The silence of the pyramid waited. In the desert, he knew the journey was over, but the question remained open. These structures were not just ruins. They were messages. They were telling the modern world that humans were capable of more than they thought. They were proof that greatness was possible. And if it was done before, it could be understood again. He turned away from the water. The video was ending, but the story was not. The past was not dead. It was waiting to be remembered, and maybe, just maybe, by looking at these ancient wonders, humanity could find a piece of itself that was